Of course, you could say, in this video, I'll share my real-life story. When I was 18, my own family stole my $45,000 college fund, and I was left sleeping in my car for weeks. But after that, I went from homeless to a millionaire, and I faced them in my $960,000 home and exposed the truth. One of those moments was watching my sister Veronica and our mother Margaret step through the doors of the welcome reception for my new $960,000 home. A home that represented every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every bit of determination I had poured into building my IT company from nothing. Even so, the tension in my gut tightened and my skin prickled because I immediately recognized the look in their eyes. The very same look I had seen at 18 on the night my entire world fell apart. Growing up in Boston, our family seemed perfectly ordinary on the surface. Dad worked in finance, Mom ran a small boutique, and together they raised 2 daughters and a golden retriever named Rusty. But as the old saying goes, appearances can be deceiving. When I was 12, the facade began to crack. Dad left, and while the divorce itself wasn't explosive, what unfolded afterward laid the groundwork for years of deep family dysfunction. Veronica, 3 years older than me, eventually married Daniel, an investment banker from a wealthy family. Their wedding was lavish, and Mom spent more than $50,000 she simply didn't have, insisting that a daughter only gets married once. I was 19 at the time, juggling 2 jobs, attending community college, and barely scraping together enough to buy my bridesmaid dress. Then came the children, James, Freya, and Caleb. With each birth, Veronica's sense of entitlement deepened, and Mom was always ready to step in and help, usually at my expense. Your sister has 3 kids to feed, Mom would remind me. What do you need extra money for? Books? Can't you just use the library? Meanwhile, I was running myself into the ground. Scholarships helped, but without any family support. I worked as a barista in the mornings, a tutor in the afternoons, and a data entry clerk on weekends. Sleep was something I simply could not afford. Dad gradually disappeared after relocating to Chicago and starting a new family. Mom made it nearly impossible for him to stay in contact with me, conveniently forgetting to pass along his calls or accidentally deleting his messages. Still, I pushed forward. While Veronica posted picture-perfect holiday photos online, I stayed up through the night coding and studying. I graduated at the top of my class. Mom showed up to my high school graduation, but slipped out early because Veronica called. James had a slight fever. I never said a word about it. I simply accepted that this was my reality and used it as fuel to build something of my own on my own terms. I didn't need their validation. What I never anticipated was how violently everything would shift on my 18th birthday. That single night shaped everything that came after, all the way up to the confrontation 14 years later. My 18th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because I had actually managed to get the evening off, which was rare. I wasn't expecting anything elaborate. Veronica and Daniel were expecting their 3rd child, and, as usual, the whole family's focus was on them. Still, turning 18 felt significant. I was legally an adult, had finished high school, and had earned partial scholarships to 3 different universities. When I got home after a tutoring session, I found Mom and Veronica huddled at the kitchen table, poring over spreadsheets. They barely looked up. "There's leftover lasagna in the fridge if you're hungry," Mom said, eyes still on the papers. I warmed a plate and sat down with them, curious. "What are you working on?" Mom finally looked up, "Just sorting out some financial things. Veronica and Daniel need a larger home now that Caleb is on the way." I nodded. This kind of conversation was nothing new. But then a cold wave moved through me. My college paperwork was sitting right there on the table. Veronica let out a dramatic sigh. "We might as well tell her, Mom." Mom straightened the papers and looked at me with that familiar expression, the one that always appeared right before she asked me to give something up for the family. "Lena, we need to talk about your college plans." She explained that with Veronica expecting again, they genuinely needed a 4-bedroom house. Daniel's bonus had come in lower than expected, and they were financially stretched thin. I sat there quietly, already knowing exactly where the conversation was heading. "The thing is," Veronica said, We've run the numbers on everything. Even with Daniel's salary and Mom contributing to the down payment, we're still coming up short. Short for what? I asked, even though the answer was already forming in my stomach. We need to use your college fund, Mom said plainly. Honestly, it's not as though you don't already have scholarships. And community college is a perfectly respectable path. You can always transfer to a 4-year university later once things aren't so financially tight for the family. My college fund, the money Dad had started setting aside before the divorce. The sum Mom had promised would remain untouched for my education. I had been counting on that money to fill the gaps my scholarships couldn't cover. But that's my money, I said, keeping my voice steady. Dad put it aside specifically for my education. Veronica rolled her eyes. Don't be selfish, Lena. We're talking about a home for your niece and nephews. Where exactly are they supposed to sleep? Should Caleb be crammed into a closet just because you want to go to some fancy university? That's not what I'm saying. I pressed back. But I have worked incredibly hard for this. I've kept a 4.0 GPA while holding down multiple jobs at the same time. Those scholarships don't cover everything. You could take out loans like everybody else, Veronica snapped. Daniel and I have a mortgage to deal with. That's just how life works. Then she added, or you could stay home and go to community college. It would be far more affordable. Something inside me shifted. A lifetime of quiet compliance and swallowing my feelings suddenly gave way to something raw and uncontainable. No, the word hung in the air between us. Mom blinked, clearly not expecting any pushback from me. Excuse me? No, I repeated with more force this time. That money is for my education. Dad, and you set it aside for me. It is not a down payment fund for Veronica's house. Mom's expression hardened. This isn't up for negotiation, Lena. This is simply what's happening. Your sister has a family to support, and I have a future to build. I shot back, my voice beginning to crack. I earned those scholarships. I worked while keeping perfect grades. I deserve to use my college fund for college. Veronica let out a short, cold laugh. Oh, please. Like you have any idea what real responsibility looks like. Try raising 3 children before you start lecturing us about what you deserve. Tears pushed at the back of my eyes, but I held them there. This isn't fair, and deep down you both know that. Mom shoved her chair back and stood up sharply. My priority is my education, I said. There's nothing wrong with that. Well then, Mom said, folding her arms tightly across her chest. If that's the attitude you're going to take, you have a decision to make. Either accept that the money is going toward helping your sister, or pack your things and work out life on your own. You're 18 years old now, after all. The ultimatum settled over the room like a weight. Veronica smiled, fully confident I would fold the way I always had. But something had broken loose inside me. Years of being treated as an afterthought, of watching Veronica's needs consistently swallow my own. I stood up slowly and calmly. I'll pack my bags. The shock that crossed their faces might have felt gratifying under different circumstances, but I was far too frightened to enjoy it. Mom had genuinely never expected me to choose independence over compliance. Don't be so dramatic, Veronica scoffed. Where would you even go? I didn't answer her. I walked into my bedroom and pulled out my largest suitcase. I packed methodically, clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and every important document I could find. The family photos stayed on the walls. They no longer felt like they belonged to me. Mom appeared in my doorway, just as I was zipping the suitcase closed. You're being completely ridiculous. Sleep on it tonight, and we'll talk about this like adults in the morning. There's nothing left to talk about, I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. You've made your position perfectly clear. Now I'm making mine clear too. I wheeled my suitcase past her, grabbed my backpack from the hook beside the front door, and walked out into the night. No one called after me. No one tried to stop me. That night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, using my work uniform as a makeshift pillow. For 2 weeks, that became my routine, working 3 jobs, sleeping in my car, and showering at the gym where I held a budget membership. I told absolutely no one. On the 15th day, my computer science teacher, Professor Clara Hughes, noticed me dozing off in the library. She gently woke me and asked if everything was all right. Something in the warmth of her eyes cracked open the composure I'd been holding together so tightly, and I told her everything. That same evening, she drove me to her home and showed me the guest room. "It's yours for as long as you need it," she said simply. "Nobody should have to go through something like this alone." Professor Hughes became far more than a teacher to me. She became my mentor, my advocate, and the first person who believed in me without conditions or expectations. She helped me track down additional scholarships, walked me through the maze of financial aid applications, and wrote a reference letter for an internship that would ultimately reshape the entire trajectory of my life. Everything that followed the night I was effectively pushed out of that house was shaped by that experience. It showed me, without any room for doubt, that I was entirely on my own. But it also showed me that chosen family can offer far more genuine support than biological relatives ever could. Most importantly, it revealed a strength in me that I hadn't known existed until I was forced to find it. With Professor Hughes guiding me, I managed to piece together enough financial aid, scholarships, and part-time work to enroll at a local state university rather than my original dream school. It wasn't Boston University, but it had a genuinely strong computer science program, and I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. College looked nothing like what my peers experienced. While they went to parties and joined clubs and built social lives, I was waitressing, staffing the university IT help desk, and taking on freelance web development projects deep into the night just to stay financially afloat. Sleep became a rare luxury, and a social life was essentially non-existent. But despite the relentless pace of it all, my GPA never slipped. Here is the full passage rephrased while preserving the meaning and approximate word count. The coursework in computer science came naturally to me, and I often found myself helping struggling classmates. One of them was Isabella Tran, brilliant but easily distracted, who went on to become my closest friend and eventual business partner. In many ways, we were complete opposites. I was structured and methodical. She was spontaneous and instinct-driven. I thrived in back-end development. She had a genuine gift for user experience and design. Together, we complemented each other perfectly. During our junior year, we started talking seriously about building a money management app aimed at young adults. Most of the tools already out there were designed for people who were already financially comfortable, not for people like us who were stretching every dollar between paychecks. We saw a real gap in the market and felt genuinely driven to fill it. Using resources available through the campus, we built a working prototype. We called it Sun, an app that helped users track their spending visually, automate their savings, and develop healthy credit habits. Our professors were impressed, but what mattered more was that our classmates actually found it useful. After graduation, Isabella and I faced a pivotal decision: take steady, reliable corporate jobs, or bet on ourselves and pursue the business. The safer route was tempting, especially given how financially precarious my situation had always been. But I kept coming back to something Professor Hughes had once told me. Sometimes the riskiest road is the one that leads somewhere truly worth going. We took the leap. We moved into a tiny, roach-infested apartment to keep our expenses as low as possible and threw ourselves completely into building Senator. I wrote code fueled by ramen noodles. Isabella redesigned user interfaces until the sun came up. We showed up to every networking event, pitch competition, and startup accelerator program we could find. For 6 months, rejection was all we collected. Investors told us we were too young, too inexperienced, or targeting the wrong audience entirely. College students don't care about financial planning, one venture capitalist said, waving us off without a second thought. But we didn't stop. Our turning point came in the form of a small business grant, just enough to bring on our first hire, a marketing professional who helped us sharpen our messaging. We made a strategic pivot, shifting our focus from current students to recent graduates navigating student loan debt. That adjustment changed everything. The app began gaining users slowly at first, then all at once. A tech blog featured us. A financial influencer with millions of followers gave Sin a public endorsement, and our user base exploded from thousands to hundreds of thousands practically overnight. Throughout all of it, I occasionally thought about reaching out to my family. I had barely spoken to any of them since that night. Mom had called 3 months after I left, not to apologize, but to inform me that the college fund had officially been spent on Veronica's down payment. Dad sent the occasional text to check in, but the relationship stayed distant and surface level. I chose instead to keep my energy directed toward the business and toward building my own life on my own foundation. The years blurred together in a steady rhythm of code, meetings, and hard-won progress. Isabella and I moved out of our rundown apartment and into a proper office. We brought on additional developers, customer service staff, and marketing specialists. Sun evolved from a simple budgeting tool into a full-scale financial platform. 5 years after we launched, we received an acquisition offer from one of the largest financial technology companies in the country. The figure was staggering, more than enough to make both Isabella and me wealthy several times over. After weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, we accepted. I was 30 years old, and almost overnight, I had more money than I had ever once imagined possible. The terrified 18-year-old who had slept in her car felt like an entirely different person. Financial security gave me something I had never truly had before, the ability to make thoughtful decisions rather than desperate ones. I invested the majority of my earnings, set up scholarship funds for first-generation college students, and eventually let myself think seriously about something I had always quietly longed for, a real home. Not just a place to sleep between work shifts, but somewhere that actually felt like mine. After months of searching, I found it. A beautiful craftsman-style house in an established, upscale neighborhood. At $960,000, it was a significant purchase, but one that was comfortably within my means. It had 4 bedrooms, hardwood floors, oversized windows, a wraparound porch, and a sprawling backyard. It needed renovation work, but I recognized its potential the moment I walked through the door. As I signed the closing paperwork, I couldn't help but think about the irony. 14 years earlier, my college fund had been drained to help Veronica purchase a larger home. Now, through my own effort and nothing else, I was buying a property worth close to $1 million. While the renovation was underway, I received an unexpected message from my father. He had come across the news about Sin's acquisition online and wanted to reach out to congratulate me. The conversation that followed was awkward and halting, but it cracked something open. He admitted he had lost track of me after I left home and had let embarrassment stop him from searching harder. He had gone through another divorce and had recently moved back to Boston. He asked, carefully, whether I might be open to meeting for coffee. That coffee meeting was uncomfortable and healing in equal measure. Dad apologized for being absent during the hardest years of my life and acknowledged that he had known about the college fund situation but had felt powerless to step in. I didn't grant him forgiveness on the spot, but I respected the fact that he told the truth. We agreed to take things slowly and work on rebuilding something between us. During that same conversation, he mentioned that Veronica and Daniel were going through serious financial trouble. Apparently, after Daniel's company underwent major restructuring, they had been forced to downsize significantly. Mom was still doing everything she could to support them. They don't know about your success, Dad said quietly. I haven't said anything to them. I nodded, genuinely uncertain how I felt about that. Part of me wanted them to know, wanted them to understand what I had built without a single ounce of their help or belief. Another part of me preferred to keep my achievements private, untouched by their awareness or reaction. As the renovation on my house neared its final stages, I began planning a housewarming celebration. After a great deal of thought, I decided to include my family on the guest list. Isabella warned me that I was setting myself up for disappointment, but I felt it was finally time to close that chapter of my life, one way or another. I sent formal invitations to my father, my mother, Veronica, and Daniel. My father responded almost immediately and accepted. My mother called, sounding surprised, but she agreed to come as well. Veronica simply texted, "We're looking forward to seeing how you've been doing. We'll be there." The stage was set for a family reunion I never thought would happen, one that would turn out to be far more dramatic than I had ever imagined. The morning of my housewarming party arrived bright and beautiful. Even though I had stayed up late putting the finishing touches on the house, I woke up early. Every room looked perfect. The living room featured a spacious, comfortable sectional sofa and built-in bookshelves. The gourmet kitchen gleamed with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. The dining room could easily accommodate 12 guests, and upstairs were 4 elegantly designed bedrooms, including a master suite with a balcony overlooking the backyard. Isabella showed up around 10 o'clock carrying champagne and a box of decorations. As she arranged the flowers, she looked at me and asked, "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? It's not too late to cancel their invitations." I felt my stomach tighten at the thought of seeing my mother and sister again, but I answered, "I need the closure. Besides, there are only 3 people out of 30 guests. If things get awkward, there will be plenty of people around to ease the tension." The catering team arrived around noon and began setting up the food stations on the first floor. By 3 o'clock, everything was ready. The food, the drinks, the music, and my nerves, which were stretched to their limit. My co-workers from the tech industry were the first to arrive, followed by a few neighbors. Soon afterward, Professor Hughes arrived with her husband. She hugged me warmly and whispered that she was incredibly proud of everything I had accomplished. College friends, business associates, and my financial advisor soon filled the house. At exactly 4:30, the doorbell rang again. I opened the door to find my father standing there awkwardly, holding a small gift bag. "Dad," I said, the words still feeling unfamiliar. "Lena," he replied as he looked past me at the house. "This place is incredible." I invited him inside, gave him a quick tour, and introduced him to several of my guests. He seemed genuinely happy to see how well my life had turned out, although he looked slightly out of place among the successful professionals gathered in my home. "Your mother and sister should be here soon," he told me. "They plan to come together." I nodded and took a sip of water, trying to hide how nervous I was. "How have they been?" I finally asked. He paused before answering. "Things haven't been easy. Daniel's work situation has been difficult for everyone. They sold their house last year and moved into a townhouse. Your mother spends a lot of time helping with the children." Before I could respond, Isabella appeared beside me. "More guests have arrived," she said softly. "I believe your mother and sister are among them." I took a deep breath and walked toward the front door. There they were. Margaret looked almost unchanged despite the 14 years that had passed. Veronica was still beautiful, though the stress lines around her eyes were impossible to miss. Behind them stood Daniel, who looked much older and more exhausted than I remembered, along with their 3 children. James, now a teenager, Freya, entering her preteen years, and Caleb, who was about 10. "Lena," my mother said carefully, "thank you for inviting us." "You're welcome," I replied, stepping aside. "Please come in." The children stood back shyly, as though they had been told to behave perfectly. I smiled at them. "If you get bored, there's a game room upstairs. Second door on the right." That seemed to break the ice. James immediately asked whether I had a gaming console, and when I told him I did, the 3 children hurried upstairs after thanking me. "Beautiful house," Daniel said as he looked around with professional curiosity. "The architectural details are remarkable." "Thank you," I answered. The renovation took 6 months, but it was worth every minute. 6 months. Veronica raised an eyebrow. "You must have had a pretty big crew working on it." "I did," I replied simply. "Would you all like a tour?" As I guided them through the house, I noticed Veronica becoming more observant and calculating. She ran her fingers across the granite countertops, peeked into closets, and commented on the spacious play area in the backyard. My mother was much quieter. Every now and then, she complimented a piece of decor or asked about one of the features. Finally, when we reached the master bedroom, she looked around and quietly said, "This place must have cost a fortune." "It certainly wasn't cheap," I admitted, "but I've been fortunate in my career." Veronica sat down on the edge of my bed without asking. "So what exactly do you do now?" Dad mentioned something about an app. I gave them a shortened version of my success story, watching their expressions slowly shift from simple curiosity to complete disbelief. "You sold your company for millions?" Veronica asked, her voice noticeably higher. "Yes," I answered calmly. The timing was right. When the tour was over, we returned downstairs, where more guests had arrived. I introduced my family to Isabella, Professor Hughes, and several friends and colleagues who already knew parts of my story. Throughout the evening, I noticed my mother and Veronica standing together in quiet corners, whispering intensely to each other. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed completely detached from those conversations and was genuinely enjoying discussions with some of my friends from the tech industry. About an hour into the party, I tapped my glass gently to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this new chapter of my life with me," I said. "This house is more than just a place to live. It represents a dream that I once believed was impossible. I'm grateful to every person who supported me and helped me reach this point." As soon as I finished my short speech, Veronica stepped forward. As Lena's sister, I'd like to say a few words as well. Her voice carried the same confidence I had known since we were children. "I agreed to pay off the fraudulent debts myself," I continued, "as long as the detective documented everything and postponed any criminal charges." I swiped to the next file. "This is the proof of payment. Every single dollar of that $45,000, plus the interest, was paid back by me over the course of 3 years. During that time, I was putting myself through college, working 3 different jobs, surviving on 4 hours of sleep a night, and living on instant ramen because I was paying off debt that I never created." Daniel looked physically ill. "I had absolutely no idea," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Veronica told me that her parents had given us the money for the down payment as a gift. Only one parent contributed," I replied quietly. "And it wasn't a gift. It was stolen." Mom finally found her voice. "You're twisting the entire story just so you can play the victim," she snapped. "We've always done everything we possibly could for you. Sometimes families have to make difficult choices for the greater good." "The greater good?" Dad repeated, his voice suddenly rising. "Margaret, she was 18 years old. She was our daughter, and you stole from her." Mom turned toward him immediately. "Don't you dare judge me, Richard. You walked away. You left me to deal with everything." "I left you," he answered firmly. "I didn't leave our daughters. And I certainly never gave you permission to steal Lena's college fund or commit fraud in her name." He turned toward me. "I knew about the college fund, and I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you. But the credit cards, the loan, I honestly had no idea." I nodded, accepting his imperfect apology for what it was worth. Realizing that her support was falling apart, Veronica quickly changed tactics. "It was an incredibly difficult time," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "We had a baby and desperately needed a home. Mom was only trying to help us, and you weren't even around for us to ask." "Maybe that's true," I answered calmly. "But none of that excuses fraud." I switched to another document. "You may find this interesting too, Daniel. While the detective was investigating the identity theft, I learned quite a bit about your family's finances." The screen displayed a list of financial records. "These are documents for 6 separate business ventures that Veronica invested in without your knowledge, using money from your joint accounts. The total losses came to more than $200,000 over the last 8 years. The color drained completely from Daniel's face. "What business ventures?" he asked. "Her college friend Megan's clothing boutique, her cousin's restaurant, a luxury pet subscription box company, and several others." I pointed toward the screen. "Every one of them failed within a year. Every one of them received significant investments from your family accounts." "Those weren't investments," Veronica said weakly. "They were personal loans to friends. They promised they would pay everything back with interest." "Is that why you kept all of it hidden?" The atmosphere in the room had become painfully tense. Some of the guests were quietly looking for a polite way to leave, uncertain whether they should remain for what had clearly become a very private family disaster. "I think," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that we've completely lost sight of why we're here. You came to my home today expecting me to give it to you because you assumed I would once again sacrifice everything I have for what Veronica wants. I'm telling you now that it will never happen again. So you're really willing to leave your own sister and her family out on the street?" Mom demanded. "Where is your compassion?" "My compassion?" I laughed softly, though there was no amusement in it. "Where was your compassion when I was sleeping in my car during the winter? Where was your compassion when you stole my identity and buried me under crushing debt before I had even started college? Mom opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. I'm not throwing anyone on the street, I said, my voice softer now, but I am not giving up my home. If your family genuinely needs financial help, I'm willing to set up education funds for James, Freya, and Caleb. They're innocent in all of this, and I'd actually like the chance to know my niece and nephews. We don't need your charity, Veronica snapped, even though Daniel's expression suggested otherwise. It's not charity, I replied. It's family helping family the way it should. Mom grabbed her purse. I think we've heard enough. Veronica, children, we're leaving. The kids are upstairs playing video games, I reminded her, and I think Daniel may want to stay. Daniel slowly nodded. I need to understand exactly what's been happening with our finances, he said. The kids can stay upstairs a little longer. Fine, Mom snapped. Veronica, let's go. As they headed toward the front door, Isabella stepped forward. I think that's for the best, she said calmly. This was supposed to be a celebration of Lena's new home, not an opportunity to pressure her into giving it away. Mom's face turned bright red. How dare you? This is a family matter. Yes, Isabella answered without hesitation. And Lena's chosen family is here to stand beside her. Maybe you should think about what real family support actually looks like before you come back. After they finally left, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal, although almost every conversation centered around the unbelievable scene everyone had just witnessed. Daniel remained in one corner of the room, quietly talking with my financial advisor while occasionally checking his phone for messages from Veronica. Later that evening, as the guests began saying their goodbyes, he walked over to me. I owe you an apology, he said sincerely. I truly had no idea about the identity theft or those secret investments. I knew about the college fund, but Veronica told me that you had agreed to it. I looked at him. Would it really have made a difference if you had known the truth? He thought about the question for a long moment. I'd like to believe it would have, he admitted. But honestly, I wasn't the same person back then. Success and money were all I cared about. He looked around the room at everything I had built. Seeing what you've accomplished entirely on your own has made me realize just how wrong my priorities were. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? I asked. He let out a long breath before answering. I'm going to have a very difficult conversation with my wife, he said quietly, and I'll probably be contacting a divorce lawyer. The amount of financial deception is simply too much to overlook. To my own surprise, I felt a pang of sadness for my sister. For all her faults and mistakes, I had never wanted her marriage to fall apart. I meant what I said about the children's education funds. I told him, no matter what happens between you and Veronica. He nodded appreciatively. They'd love the chance to know their aunt, he said. Especially James. He's really interested in programming. After Daniel left to pick up the children, Isabella and I started cleaning up the house. Well, she said as she loaded glasses into the dishwasher, that was definitely the most dramatic housewarming party I've ever been to. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't exactly the kind of closure I imagined, I admitted, but it was closure all the same. Do you think they'll try to contact you again? She asked. Your mother and Veronica? Eventually, I answered. Probably the next time they need something. I closed the dishwasher and stood up straight. But next time, I'll be ready. I'm never going to let myself be their doormat again. As the last guest walked out and silence finally settled over my new home, I wandered slowly from room to room, taking in everything I'd built. The house wasn't just a physical place. It represented a life I had created through determination, hard work, and the courage to stand up for myself when it mattered most. The days following the housewarming turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. I had expected endless angry phone calls from Mom and Veronica, manipulative text messages, or maybe even surprise visits at my front door. Instead, there was nothing, just silence. 3 days after the party, Daniel called and asked if I would meet him at a coffee shop near his office. Over a pair of lattes, he told me, Veronica moved back in with your mother. For now, she has the kids with her, but we've agreed to split custody equally while we figure everything out. I'm sorry about your marriage, I said honestly. He shrugged, looking both exhausted and strangely relieved. After everything that came out of your party, I started digging through our finances. It's actually worse than you realize. How is that possible? You had a great position at the investment firm. He corrected me. I lost that job 6 months ago during a round of layoffs. Since then, I've been working as a financial consultant, but I'm making about a third of what I used to earn. Meanwhile, Veronica kept spending as if nothing had changed. He slid a thick folder across the table. These are statements from accounts I didn't even know existed. Credit cards that have been maxed out. Loans with signatures that aren't mine. Second mortgages that were taken out on the house before we sold it. As I looked through the paperwork, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She did to you what she and Mom did to me. I asked quietly. On a much bigger scale, he answered grimly. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. What are you going to do? He lowered his eyes. Honestly, bankruptcy seems unavoidable. I nodded slowly. My offer to create education funds for the kids still stands. I can set up accounts that can only be used for school and college expenses. His expression softened. That would mean more than you know, he said sincerely. He hesitated before continuing. And would you maybe consider spending some time with them now and then? They could really use stable adults in their lives right now. That conversation marked the beginning of a completely new chapter for me, for Daniel, and for the children. They were bright, curious kids who were handling their parents' separation with remarkable strength and maturity. About 2 weeks after the housewarming party, Dad invited me out for dinner. We sat in a quiet Italian restaurant, eating pasta while he finally spoke honestly about everything that had happened over the years. I failed you, he admitted. After the divorce, Margaret made it difficult for me to stay involved, but that's not an excuse. I should have fought much harder to remain a part of your life. I looked at him for a long moment before finally asking the question I had carried with me for years. Why didn't you? After 14 years, he let out a long, heavy sigh. Part of it was guilt, he admitted. The divorce was my fault. I had an affair with my second wife before I left. Margaret found out, and she used it as leverage to control everything, including my access to you girls. This revelation shifted how I understood parts of our family history, but it still did not excuse his absence. I also failed to protect your college fund, he continued. It was held in a joint account with Margaret. I trusted her to handle it properly despite everything between us. When I finally discovered what had happened, I was too ashamed to face you about it. You could have helped me, I said, remembering those nights when I slept in my car. I didn't know, he replied softly. Margaret told me you had moved in with a friend from school. By the time I realized the truth, months had already passed, and you had stopped responding to my messages. That night, we talked for hours, slowly unraveling years of misunderstandings, half-truths, and outright lies. My father was not without fault, but I came to understand that he had been manipulated by my mother almost as much as I had been. Your mother wasn't always like this, he explained. After Veronica was born, something changed. She became obsessed with building a perfect life for her, often at your expense. I tried to balance things and speak up for you, but it only created more conflict. Why the favoritism? I asked, a question that had haunted my childhood. He considered it carefully. I think Veronica reminded Margaret of the version of herself she wanted to be: beautiful, socially confident, traditional. You were more like me, analytical, independent, always questioning. And I think that frightened her. The first message from Veronica arrived 2 days after my dinner with Dad. It was a long email that shifted between apology and justification. She admitted to identity theft, but blamed it on financial desperation and our mother's influence. She apologized for the housewarming confrontation, but still insisted that her family's needs mattered more than what she called my comfort. Classic Veronica, Isabella commented after I showed her the email. She's apologizing without actually taking responsibility. At least she's acknowledging it happened, I said, surprisingly calm now that I was no longer under her influence. That's still progress. My mother's approach was far more direct. She began calling every day, leaving voicemails that swung between anger and pleading. Families should forgive each other, she said in one message. We all made mistakes, but so did you when you embarrassed us in front of your friends. I didn't respond to either of them immediately. Instead, I focused on establishing firm boundaries with my therapist, Dr. Jennifer Blake. Your mother and sister show classic patterns of manipulative behavior, Dr. Blake explained during one session. They're used to you eventually giving in. Your consistency now feels unfamiliar and threatening to them. I still feel guilty sometimes, I admitted, especially about the children being caught in the middle. That's a natural response, she reassured me. But you're also modeling healthy boundaries for those children, and you're supporting them directly through education funds and meaningful time. That is real family support, not the conditional version you were raised with. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Veronica's situation deteriorated further. Their divorce proceedings uncovered additional financial irregularities. Daniel proceeded with bankruptcy as he had anticipated. Veronica and the children stayed in my mother's modest home, which quickly became crowded and tense. 6 months after the housewarming, Daniel secured a new position at a smaller firm and moved into a 3-bedroom apartment. The custody arrangement gave him access to the children every other week. During his time with them, I visited James occasionally, helping him with programming assignments or simply offering a stable adult presence. At one of these visits, Daniel mentioned that Veronica had started therapy. Her therapist thought it might help with the divorce and the financial issues, he told me. I'm not convinced she's fully committed, but it's a start. Around the same time, I finally agreed to meet my mother for coffee. The conversation was difficult but civil. She had visibly aged in the 6 months since the housewarming. Living with Veronica and the children is hard, she admitted. There's no privacy, no peace, and her spending habits, she trailed off, shaking her head. You enabled those habits, I said gently. I wanted her to have what I never had, she replied. There was a rare moment of self-awareness in her voice. I grew up poor. I wore hand-me-downs. I never had the things other girls had. I swore my daughter would never experience that. You had 2 daughters, I reminded her. She looked away, embarrassed. I know. I convinced myself you were stronger, more independent, that you didn't need the same support. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest she had ever come. This long-standing pattern of financial deception made it clear that my mother's behavior was something deeper than favoritism alone. Rather than simple favoritism, it revealed deeper issues rooted in control, entitlement, and possibly unresolved mental health struggles. Meanwhile, Veronica's therapy appeared to be producing real change. Our weekly meals with the children gradually shifted from awkward encounters into interactions that were cautiously pleasant. She secured employment as an administrative assistant at a local company, her first serious job since her marriage, and moved into a modest apartment. Once living with Mom became financially unsustainable for both of them. I've never really learned how to stand on my own, she admitted during one of our conversations. Mom handled everything for me. Then Daniel took over. When everything collapsed, I didn't know how to function independently. I felt an unexpected wave of compassion watching her struggle with basic adult responsibilities like budgeting, meal planning, and maintaining a home. Veronica, like me, had in many ways been shaped and damaged by Mom's dysfunction, though in a different form. Her role as the golden child had limited her ability to develop resilience and self-reliance. The children adjusted to their new reality with surprising ease. James, now 11, flourished in the coding group I introduced him to. Freya developed a growing passion for science that neither Veronica nor Daniel had previously nurtured. Caleb's fascination with dinosaurs evolved into a broader love of natural history. I set up college funds for each of them, with strict conditions that the money be used exclusively for education, a safeguard to ensure history would not repeat itself. Daniel and I developed an unexpected friendship grounded in mutual respect. He had confronted the financial disaster directly, slowly rebuilding his credit and career while becoming a more present and engaged father than he had been during his marriage. The bankruptcy was humiliating, he admitted, with a more honest version of himself emerging. Not all relationships, however, could be repaired. Mom continued to avoid true accountability, alternating between surface-level apologies and subtle justifications. During one particularly difficult dinner, she remarked that my success was partly due to her tough love approach. If we hadn't pushed you out of the nest, she said, would you have developed the same drive? She spoke as if my homelessness had been an intentional lesson rather than an act of abandonment. I gently set my fork down. That's like saying abuse makes people stronger, I replied. Some people survive it despite what happened to them, not because of it. I succeeded in spite of how I was treated, not because of it. She quickly changed the subject, as she always did when faced with direct confrontation. These moments confirmed Dr. Blake's assessment that while my mother might modify her behavior to maintain some form of connection, genuine remorse or deep insight might never come. Some individuals simply lack the capacity for that level of self-reflection. Dr. Blake had told me, you can adjust your expectations and decide what kind of limited relationship, if any, supports your well-being. By the time my house's 1-year anniversary approached, I had established clear boundaries for family interaction. Monthly lunches with Veronica and the children, occasional coffee with Mom, regular dinners with Dad, and more consistent time with the kids during Daniel's custody weeks. To mark the occasion, I hosted a small gathering in sharp contrast to the large, chaotic housewarming the year before. Isabella arrived with her new fiancé. Professor Hughes and her husband attended. Dad came with Laura, their relationship now serious. Daniel brought the children for a few hours. Even Veronica stopped by briefly, in a noticeably more pleasant and composed state. Mom was the only absence, her decision. After I refused to include certain toxic family acquaintances she insisted on inviting. It was a small but important victory in maintaining my boundaries. As the evening continued and guests enjoyed dessert on the patio, James approached me holding his laptop. Aunt Lena, can you look at my code? I'm trying to build a game, but the graphics aren't rendering properly. We sat together on the porch swing, debugging his JavaScript as fireflies flickered in the fading light. That simple moment, an aunt helping her nephew, family supporting one another in a healthy way, brought tears to my eyes, which I quickly wiped away. Are you okay? James asked, noticing. More than okay, I replied. Just happy you're here. Later that night, after everyone had left, I walked slowly through my home in every sense of the word. It had become a sanctuary, not only from the outside world, but from the destructive family patterns that had nearly broken me. Within these walls, I had built new routines, new connections, and a new understanding of family based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. My journey from sleeping in my van at 18 to owning this beautiful house at 32 was not simply about financial success. It was about reclaiming my worth, establishing boundaries, and building a life aligned with my values rather than other people's expectations. My relationship with my family would likely always remain complicated. Mom might never fully acknowledge the damage she caused. Veronica's growth might always have limits. Dad's attempts at redemption could never erase years of absence. But I no longer needed their approval or validation to feel whole. The frightened 18-year-old who once drove away from her childhood home with nowhere to go had found not only safety, but strength. She had learned that family is sometimes chosen rather than inherited, and that standing in your truth, even when it is difficult, creates real connection rather than hollow obligation. As I sat on my veranda with a cup of tea, watching the stars emerge in the summer sky, I felt a deep and lasting peace. The journey had not been easy, but it had brought me exactly where I was meant to be. Home, in every sense of the word.